Open sourcing our progress on Tailwind CSS version 4 from Adam. I'm excited about this. I've been hearing really good things about Tailwind v4, specifically that it's leaning more into actual CSS standard stuff, and I'm curious what that looks like, so let's take a look. Last summer at Tailwind Connect, I shared a preview of Oxide, a new high-performance engine for Tailwind that we've been working on, designed to simplify the developer experience and take advantage of how the web platform has evolved in recent years. The new engine was originally going to ship as a version 3.x release, but even though we were committed to backwards compatibility, this feels so clearly like a new generation of the framework that it deserves to be a version 4. Love you, Adam. Please let me do a copy pass in the future. This is a digest of a sentence. Still early, and we've got a lot of work to do, but today we're open sourcing our progress and tagging the first public version 4 alpha release, so you can start experimenting with it and help us get to a stable release later this year. There is not a single period until the end of this, and there is not a single period till the end of that. That's a impressive level of run-ons. Designers, not copy editors. I'll try to keep it brief to save some of the excitement for the stable release, but if you like to play with very early and experimental stuff, there should be plenty of information here to get you going. A new engine built for speed. If you're wondering how this engine is built for speed, it's Rust. It's all Rust. This is a quick overview from when Oxide was originally announced, when it was, again, still planned for version 3. I think it's really useful to see it in this context, though, because as they say here, Oxide's a lot of different pieces, but they all boil down to two goals: improve performance and simplifying the developer experience. We're making Tailwind more of an all-in-one CSS processing tool by integrating Lightning CSS. If you're already familiar with Lightning, it's an extremely fast CSS parser, transformer bundler, and minifier. You kind of think of it almost like the Biome and Roam projects, or even Bun, but for CSS, trying to do all of the junk you need to go from a nice, fun developer experience with CSS to actual good production code. Even compared to ES Build, which is very fast for processing CSS, Lightning is somehow even faster. Lightning CSS lets you use modern CSS features and future syntax today. So you can put in this fancy color syntax with a helper like that, and it gets generated into all of these different things for the different environments that have different expectations. These things are so hard to manage when you're targeting a lot of different browsers. Lightning's really good. It's been more and more hyped recently, and seeing Tailwind standardize on it is super exciting. It's also really good at minification. A 20 kilobyte difference might not seem like a lot when you're considering that every website in the world loads CSS. This adds up quick across the world, and seeing theoretically Rust trim down the amount of data being transferred over the internet long term, that's exciting. And this is for all of Bootstrap 4, 10,000 lines, minified 20 kilobytes less. Imagine if every Bootstrap site had 20 kilobytes fewer bytes down the wire. It'd be pretty huge. They also have really good CSS module support and plenty more. I could spend a lot of time talking about Lightning, but we're not here to talk about Lightning. We're here to talk about Tailwind. And as they say here, using Lightning means that in the next version of Tailwind, things like importing other CSS files, nesting, vendor prefixes, and syntax transforms for future CSS features will all just work. No need to install or configure any additional tools like auto prefixer or post CSS import. If you've been around for a while in the Tailwind days, you know how annoying it was getting all of the right post CSS, auto prefix type stuff working in order to get Tailwind to behave in most projects. With Lightning, that's all gone. Lightning CSS is written in Rust, which makes it extremely fast, and we're dipping our toes into Rust ourselves too by rewriting some of the most critical paths, like scanning all of your template files for class names. With these improvements, we're seeing build times drop by over 50% in real-world projects, bringing the production build times down to around 150 milliseconds for even our largest projects. I will say, going from JavaScript to Rust, I would expect more than a 50% bump, but still really nice. You can see the difference in the chart. Oxide's also going to bring a simplified configuration experience. I'm honestly a little more excited for this part, I'll be real. I don't have issues with Tailwind's performance in terms of the build side, so this is hype. We're adding automatic content detection, so you won't need to configure the paths to all your template files anymore. And we're making it even easier to add Tailwind to your own CSS by replacing the need for all of the @Tailwind directives with a simple @import Tailwind call at the top of your CSS file. Good stuff. I also shared a very early look at an idea that we're exploring for configuring Tailwind right in your CSS files instead of JavaScript. With CSS-based configuration, automatic content detection, and the simplified import story, configuring Tailwind with some custom colors and fonts might look as simple as this in the future. This is really cool stuff. If you're not familiar with Oak, it's a new color standard space for getting really accurate colors. Chaotic syntax, definitely not what we want to talk about here, but okay, it's pronounced OK Leech. Apparently. Thank you for the corrections, chat. This lets you pick and set up specific themes for your application. Here we set the font family for sans to be Inter and the display to be Satoshi, and we have these colors that we can use for other things going forward. That's cool. previously this was not easy to set up in your Tailwind config. We're planning to introduce all of this stuff without any breaking changes, and many of these improvements, including Lightning, integrations, as well as our Rust-based template parser, will be available in Tailwind 3.4 in the next couple months. That didn't happen because you've seen any of my coverage about Rust stuff. It always slips. I don't think any Rust project is ever actually shipped on the expected date ever, which is fine, but it just doesn't happen. So now that it's actually shipping as part of the version 4 alpha, let's see what we're at. Up to 10 times faster. You can do a full build of the Tailwind site in 100 milliseconds instead of 1,000 milliseconds. So that's down from a second to a tenth of a second. And Catalyst UI, which is their UI kits, down to 0.05 seconds from 0.3. That's a pretty big jump. This is much better than what I saw in the other stuff before. They're also talking about the smaller footprint, which is exciting because you didn't know this. Tailwind's already like hilariously performant. One of the most performant CSS solutions that exists, simply because it can reuse all of the classes, and the HTML can be gzipped really well if the class names are in a consistent order. So getting even smaller, that's very exciting. To be fair, the CSS side, which is what this makes smaller, was never big in the first place, but a 35% reduction is a win regardless. Rust where it counts. I like this framing for it. We've migrated some of the most expensive and parallelizable parts of the framework to Rust, while keeping the core of the framework in TypeScript for extensibility. I like this in particular. If you do everything in Rust, you'll never get contributions anymore, and Tailwind thrives with contributions. So making sure that there are options for people who want to just write TypeScript and make Tailwind extensions is essential. This is one of the coolest parts. The only dep now is Lightning CSS. No more auto prefixing, no more post CSS, no more random junk. You just use Lightning now, as well as a custom parser that they wrote and designed in Rust to read over their data structures, read all of your template files, and figure out what CSS isn't needed to be included. The parsing is now 2 times as fast as it was when they were using post CSS previously. Good stuff. And again, with the unified toolchain, to touch on this a bit, the idea that Tailwind isn't just a plugin anymore, it's an all-in-one tool for processing your CSS. That's a huge change. People are going to be upset, but it's also the right call. If you think of Tailwind as a rejection of CSS, the separation of concerns, and an embracing of CSS, the thing that we need to scale to our applications in many different ways, leaning into the framework processing of your CSS is a really strong angle. We've integrated Lightning CSS directly into the framework, so you don't have to configure anything about your CSS pipeline. Built-in import handling, no need to set up and configure a tool like post CSS import. Built-in vendor prefixing, you don't have to add auto prefixer. Built-in nesting support, syntax transforms, etc., etc. You get the idea. And designed for the modern web. Again, really exciting stuff. No longer focus as much on legacy. Theoretically, Lightning can handle a lot of that, but they're not trying to target Internet Explorer anymore. Let's see what they're saying here. Looking to the future with Tailwind v4 and trying to build a framework that's going to feel cutting edge for years to come. Native cascading layers. Interesting. We're using real @layer rules now, which solves a ton of specificity problems that we've wrestled with in the past. I have not used @layer and @property, honestly, ever. So my understanding of layers probably been screwed up by how Tailwind uses it, honestly. So I'm excited to see what people use these things for within Tailwind projects. They also have color mix-ins. This I know a good bit more about. This is exciting. Makes it even easier than ever to use the opacity modifier syntax when using custom CSS variables for color, or even adjusting the opacity of current color. To go back to the OKLCH, this makes it really easy to affect the opacity of a color and make adjustments where you move these numbers to make color palettes that look good, where with a RGB standard, not anywhere near as viable. Container queries in core is a really fun addition as well. We've added support for container queries directly to core with new @min and @max variants to support custom container query ranges. That's exciting. We're also working on refreshing the color palette with wide gamut colors and introducing support for other modern CSS features like @starting style, anchor positioning, and more. Very interesting. I really like the idea of the wide gamut colors on the color palette. If any of y'all have not used the Tailwind colors, even if you're not a Tailwind dev or you hate Tailwind, getting a good color palette is obnoxious and expensive. And here they just hand you one. They give you all the hex codes for all these things. You just grab them when you want them and you're good to go. This is one of my favorite resources. I use this all the time, even on non-Tailwind stuff. Composable variants. The new architecture makes it possible to compose together variants that act on other selectors, like group, star, peer star, has star, and a new not star variant that we've introduced for v4. In earlier releases, variants like group has were explicitly defined in the framework, but now group star can compose with the other existing things like the has variant, which can compose with other variants like focus. Interesting to think that before the colon, dashes are kind of stacking these variants, and on the other side, it's applying the specific expectation of a given variant. I'm not sure necessarily how I feel about the dash being used differently on both sides, but it is exciting to see the ability to stack these without weird bracket syntax. Yeah, there's no no limits to the composability. You can even write stuff like group not has peer not data active if for some horrible reason that's what you need to do. Be careful. There are certain bloggers that are going to see this and screenshot it as a blessed example of how to write Tailwind and use it to own you. So be careful. Zero configuration content detection. It's a silly thing, but it is very exciting. You'll be able to use Tailwind without even having a config in the future. You just install the Tailwind package and it goes. If you want to config things, I'm sure you'll still be able to, but Tailwind is now by default zero config. Huge, huge, huge. You'll notice that at least in the early alpha releases, it's not even possible to configure your content paths. For most projects, you're never going to need to do this ever again. Tailwind just finds your templates files for you. We do this using one of two ways, depending on how you've integrated Tailwind into your project. One way is that they use the post CSS plugin or the CLI. Tailwind will crawl your entire project looking for template files using a bunch of heuristics we've built to keep things fast, like not crawling directories that are in your gitignore files and ignoring binary file formats. Or you can use the Vite plugin, which relies on the module graph. This is amazing because we know exactly what files you're actually using, so it's maximally performant and with no false positives or negatives. We're hoping to expand this approach outside of the Vite ecosystem with other bundler plugins in the future. I would expect some crazy stuff to happen inside of TurboPack. Anyways, we'll introduce an explicit content path solution in the future, but we're curious to see how the automatic approach works for everyone. It's working awesome in our own projects. I'm very curious as well. CSS first configuration is a major goal of Tailwind v4, specifically making it feel CSS native and less like a JS library. Once you've installed it, you add it to your project with a regular CSS at import statement. So you don't include Tailwind in your JavaScript anywhere, you just at import in your main CSS. And instead of setting up all of your customizations in a JS config file, you just use CSS variables now. At theme, there you go. The special at theme directive tells Tailwind to make new utilities and variants available based on those variables, letting you use classes like 3xl, text, neon, lime in your markup. That's pretty cool. Just by putting these things here, you've now created the 3xl breakpoint, which you set to 1920, and then you can specify these colors as well. My one hesitation here is that type safety and editor feedback isn't going to be as good, where if I make a bad change inside of my Tailwind config and I have the types assigned to it, it will yell at me for that and I won't be able to make that change. I don't know if the tooling for CSS has gotten to the point where like a VS Code plugin will correctly parse this and yell at you. Where like if you set up create T3 app with Tailwind, we set up your Tailwind config for you in such a way that it is type safe and you'll get type errors if you use it incorrectly. I'm concerned that won't be the case here necessarily. It's not a big deal, but it is a deal and it's worth considering. This is really cool though, that you can just add things to your CSS file and then access them in Tailwind like that. That's hype. I hope that the plugin ecosystem can catch up. They're adding new CSS variables, behaves like extend did in earlier versions of the framework, but you can override a whole set of variables by clearing the namespace with syntax like color-star initial before defining all of your custom values. So this replaces all of the values that already exist. You even do color gray star to just wipe out the grays, or such that you don't have to worry about the existing things. We're still fine-tuning some of the naming conventions, but you can explore the default theme on GitHub to see what's available to customize. That's cool. Does that mean that the whole Tailwind theme now is just one giant? That's pretty cool. I love that most of this is just colors. I think it's fair to say now that Tailwind's primarily a color framework. If you don't want to explicitly clear the default themes and would rather start from scratch, you can import Tailwind preflight and Tailwind utilities directly to skip importing the default theme. So this is just importing the parts that are the utilities of Tailwind, not the colors, the overrides, and all the fun things that come with the rest of Tailwind. Now you can skip this and define everything you want to yourself. We also make all of your theme values available as native CSS variables in your custom CSS. Interesting. That's cool as well. This means no more add apply if you just want to apply a color to some random thing on the CSS side. This makes it easy to reference theme values in your arbitrary values without needing the theme function. Seems nice. You can just call var, put something in, and it'll access it. It also makes it possible to use your theme values when working with UI libraries like Frame or Motion without having to use the resolve config function. That's really hype. Motion was not the most fun thing to deal with before due to how it passes values to and from your components. Now that you're applying initial, animate, and exit stuff, you're not just applying class names, you're applying CSS. But this effectively applies that. Really cool stuff. So what else has changed? We don't take breaking changes lightly, but there's a few things we're doing differently in v4 that are worth sharing. They removed deprecated utilities. So a bunch of these things they're no longer supporting have been removed. The post-CSS plugin and CLI are now separate packages. The main Tailwind package doesn't include these anymore since not everyone needs them. Instead, they should be installed separately using the post-CSS or Tailwind CLI packages directly. There's no default border color. The border used to default to gray 200, but now it defaults to current color like the browser does. I like that a lot. It should not have defaulted to gray before. That was annoying. Rings are 1 pixel by default now. That's nice. I did not love the blue 3 pixel rings that most things used that were using Tailwind. It's a nice change. Again, also current color. They find themselves using ring star utilities as an alternative for borders in their projects and using outline for focus rings, so we think making things consistent here is a helpful change. I'd agree. There's a handful of other really low-level implementation detail changes that might serve us in some way in your project, but nothing deliberate like these ones. If you bump into anything surprising, let us know. And at the end of this, I'll actually try running Tailwind v4 on one of my projects to see what happens. Roadmap to version 4. This new engine is a ground-up rewrite, and up until now, we've been focused entirely on the reimagined developer experience using the new configuration approach. We put an enormous amount of value into backwards compatibility, and that's where the bulk of the work lies before we can tag a stable 4.0 release later this year. That includes support for JavaScript config files still, because they're not available in this right now, explicit content path configuration, support for other dark modes, plugins and custom utilities, prefix support. You can't configure a prefix for your class right now, but they'll be bringing that back. Safe lists and block lists so that you can prevent certain classes from being generated or guarantee that they will be. Support for important configuration, which isn't really a thing right now, apparently. Interesting. Support for the theme function, which you don't need because you can use var now, but would be nice for backwards compatibility, as well as a standalone CLI for the new engine. So you don't need to use their package directly. You can just call the CLI. This will be huge for things like other ecosystems. Like I know Elixir and Phoenix are big on Tailwind. I know that the PHP community's been using Tailwind more. A standalone CLI will be very helpful for them to integrate. Here they're just saying they expect to fix more bugs and find new things to add, but they don't have an exact timeline, but they would love to mark 4 as stable before the summer holiday season kicks in. Exciting stuff. Now they're saying to try it. So in here we have our upload things server, inside of which we have our post CSS config. That's not valid syntax. They really put bad syntax in their blog post. That alone makes me much less confident it's actually going to work here. All this custom shit we have in here. I'm also curious, simply because we're doing so much Shad UI stuff here, what happens? Let's see how broken everything is. Not too bad. Colors are different. Those shouldn't be that color. Okay, maybe it's actually quite broken. Interesting. Yeah, the background. No, the background's there. It's just lighter. All of the coloring's gone. I think it's because we do everything in the Tailwind config right now. Like we have our brand colors all defined in here. Yeah. This is not going to be trivial for us to move over. In order for this to be actually valuable for us, we would have to manually port this over or have some type of script that will dump this into CSS, or just wait for them to support the Tailwind config again. But for this project, we have way too much Tailwind config going on to just do this. The other thing I didn't see mentioned, which is actually going to be killer for us too, Tailwind typography is such a good package that it's resulted in people thinking sites have a look when they use Tailwind. You just wrap an article with the pros and then the pros XL if you want it for large screens, drop some traditional formatted markup, be it like an article with H1, H2 tags, with Ps, all the things you would expect from like a blog post. It just makes it look right. This is a phenomenal plugin. This is actually the plugin that made me start paying more attention to Tailwind and eventually falling in love with it. So it's very important to me. And it is not certain whether or not this will actually work inside of V4 right now. So as exciting as this is, I don't really have the ability to test this in a meaningful way. Oh, Gabriel found a link to Tailwind Playground. Yeah, fuck it. Bun install. You know what would make this even more cracked? If we had Turbo. 1.0 is the newest, right? Oh, they published a new version 1 hour ago. Interesting. But I want to bun run dev here and actually see this work. Turbo and the CSS global don't get along, it looks like. Content, Tailwind v4 play, app, global CSS. I guess I will remove Turbo for now. That's sad. You could see when we have a huge tooling shift like what Tailwind v4 is doing, it catches strays. A lot of things break that might not have been expected to. Well, we can still use the Tailwind compiler, but at the same time, we won't be getting as big of a win here because we're not going to get to have the next compiler be as fast. But we should still see a change here. I'll get rid of the underline instead. That'll be clear. Saving now. That works. Doesn't feel notably faster. I'm just going to init a new project. Let's do the test to see the difference here. Okay, I'm going to remove underline. It seems to be actually faster here. So saving in 3, 2, 1. Deleting, saving in 3, 2, 1. That's actually way faster. For the time comparisons, go back over to here. Here are the speeds I was seeing with the new Tailwind compiler that were in the 400 millisecond range. The new one was like 4 times slower for me. This again is a next project, which seems to not be that well optimized. Does this also use Turbo? It does not. So I'm going to add Turbo, which should theoretically make this go even faster. Deleting, saving now. That's literally instant. Saving now. Yeah, it'd be cool if it told me when it was doing the new builds, like it did before. But Turbo doesn't always give you the best logs, I'll be honest. But the difference there, I can feel the difference for sure. Like I'm saving now and it's literally instantaneous. This is again why I'm like not always hyped on these big Rust rewrites taking so much time, because I'm using the old JavaScript code for this compilation. Rust is helping manage the build pipeline outside of that on the next side, but the performance I'm seeing for that is insane. Obviously, if this project had significantly more files in it, it's not going to be able to parse it that fast, but what the fuck? It's parsing it literally instantly right now. So I'll admit, I'm a bit disappointed. I know that their goal is to fix the standard and make it easier to integrate with first, and then get good support in everything modern, including Next.js. But it's sad to see that Next doesn't get these benefits right now. Interesting to learn. Overall, I'm still really hyped, though, to be clear. These are necessary changes that are going to make Tailwind go way, way further. Sorry, I just dragged you all along to see how annoying it was to actually set up right now. But as per always with tools like Tailwind, the community will take over and make these things go from a little annoying to incredibly simple and nice to work with. I don't know how much else I have to say about this, but let me know in the comments if I should cover Tailwind v4 when it's a little bit more stable, because what I see already is very exciting. See you guys as always, and until next time, peace nerds.